met Krishma, and I really delightful with its complexity and its depth. And I am really happy to be doing this, and we've got some really good questions, but we're going to open up with her favorite, or one of her favorite excerpts from her book, From Ash to Ashes.
So I'm going to do a small reading about a scene in the novel. Oh, sorry, I need my glasses. We would never see him, and his tall, thin figure, hear his quiet voice, his gentle face and soft expression were now frozen as only a memory that would never grow or age. He would now never again touch his books, flipping through their abundant pages, and never again wear the clothes hanging in his closet. All his things would remain, and his scent from his room would soon dissipate into thin air. We could not contain him, his scent, his body, his essence. We could not hold the stuff that contained his life, that made him who he was. He slipped through our fingers, and we could never, ever find him again in another. He was truly unique. There was no one like him. Everything he had once owned would no longer be his. In religion school at the Sikh temple, they taught us that people come alone with nothing into the world, and they leave alone with nothing from the world except their deeds and their devotion to God etched on their souls. Jeet had also come into the world with nothing and left with no possession or person, but he had left us a deep scar, a secret that had consumed him and left us covering his tracks. And this is one of my favorite passages in the book because it really sums up of what it feels like to lose somebody. And not only to lose somebody, but what does it mean once someone has left you, when they're gone? All their things are still there, but the value of those things is meaningless, has no value at all. Many of you know, after elderly parents die, oftentimes people donate or literally throw away their clothes, their shoes, because those things have absolutely no use anymore. So what I wanted to bring forth in the reader was the idea that our entire lives we place so much emphasis and importance in the possessions that we have. We're so attached to our things, but at the end of the day, when you die, those things mean nothing to everyone you leave behind. And so maybe we should put more value in other things rather than physical objects. So that was why it's one of my favorite passages.
Yeah, and it's a great segue to my first question, because one of the immediate feelings when I opened up to the first page was how skillfully you select strings of words to bring these struggles of the characters to life. I was like, this is incredible how you just made it so clear and ongoing, so that it really became so full. And you know, as a reader, you really felt the struggle of the characters. So, what was that process? How did you accomplish that?
So I've always written poetry since I was a kid, and I wanted to sort of bring that poetic voice into my book. I didn't want to tell the story in words that are often spoken. I wanted to bring to the emotions of the characters an image, a visual image, because I'm a very visual person. I see things. When I read, I see it happening in front of me. And so I wanted to bring that descriptive language and that poetic feeling to the words.
Yeah, you definitely did really well with that. I think that's something a lot of authors try to do, and it just misses the mark, but it was very impressive how you handled that. Now the setting was another thing that I noticed. It's really phenomenal. It's New York City in the 90s, very iconic. You don't see a lot of books in that setting, which is interesting because it's a great backdrop. And what makes the setting even more worthy is that it's seen through the eyes of a person, of a community whose voice we don't often get to hear of in literature or movies or anything in our culture. So I learned a lot about religion through reading this book, and the nuances between Indians living on Long Island, and how did your own life experience affect and shape the book?
So definitely my life really shaped the book in terms of the sections where the main character, Mira, where she's a college student at New York University, which I also was, living in the city in the late 90s, which I also was. I wanted to bring the reader back to New York City the way it was before 9/11. You know, the Twin Towers jutting into the sky. In fact, when I was studying at NYU, it was relatively safe. We could roam the nights with other friends by ourselves without worry. It was the pre-Uber, the pre-cell phone days, and yet we survived. So I wanted to bring that narrative into the story. And but I grew up in Long Island, so there was sort of that, the comparison between your suburban Long Island life versus the city life, and how much Mira grows as a person once she enters the city. Because Long Island is sort of a sheltered place, as we all know, because we're all here in Long Island. Long Island is made up of small villages and small towns, as opposed to New York City, which is one of the biggest cosmopolitan cities in the world. And all of a sudden, her whole life is changed, and her whole mindset is broadened because of that city. And so that's how I sort of brought that in.
Right, yeah, you can see that shift in Mira. It's almost overwhelming and uncomfortable for her because she doesn't know what's happening to her, but
Yes.
she's growing as a person.
Yes.
Yeah. So another aspect of your book that I was very impressed by was the dialogue. I personally am repulsed by dialogue that becomes cliche or unrealistic or insincere. I did not experience that while reading your book. I was like waiting for almost the cheesy dialogue, but it just never happened. It was so skillfully done. How did you make that happen? Did you rewrite? Did you talk out loud? The word choices, and it just seems so natural from the characters. And each one of them had their own voice, distinct dialogue. So you did that very well.
Thank you. So I wanted to be as authentic as I could, and I wanted it to feel real. These were real people, and they had real, unique, and different personalities from each other. The dialogue, I tried to keep it real. Things that I heard growing up, things that I heard friends, the way they spoke growing up, expressions that they used. Rather than imagining a dialogue, I sort of took from actual dialogues in life and put that in there so that, it would seem real. And,
Did you have any specific way of documenting that?
No, I literally, I'm not a very organized writer. I'm a spontaneous person, and that's how my writing is. So when I sit down and write, I'm not making a timetable, I'm not thinking this is what the person is going to say, this is how the chapter is going to end. I don't even actually know. I'm just going to sit there and write, and it's just going to come to me. It's just going to flow, and their emotions are going to flow, and the way they're going to express their emotions through dialogue is just going to happen by itself. So.
If there's one thing you can redo about your book, what would it be?
Oh gosh, so I can't tell you how much I regret this, but originally when I had written the story, I had multiple point of views, and I actually love that because I think that every person sees things in every situation in their own way. How you see something is different from how I see it. So if we're in a relationship, you know, what the guy is taking away from what the girl said and what the girl is taking away from how the guy reacted is very different in their minds. And I had originally written the story to express that. So you hear, for example, Dave's voice in Dave's language. You hear what he's thinking. And then in another chapter, it's Mira again. But then later, I felt like maybe a lot of the feedback that I had gotten was, well, you know, the more traditional way of writing is to actually put, you know, one person's, is the person telling the story. So then I sort of shifted it, and yet later on, when there was a mistake in publishing of my book and a lot of the old version was printed and a lot of people got the old version, it was still in multiple point of views. And the feedback that I actually got from the younger generation, meaning people under the age of 30, was like, wow, we love this because there's 4 different people talking in the story. And I was like, oh, there we go, messed that one up. So if I could go back, I would leave it the originally way that I had written it. Yeah. So oh well.
Yeah.
Next book.
Next
Whose
one.
idea was it?
Huh?
Whose idea was it to change it to one voice?
A lot of it was the person whose opinion matters to me most in my life and is my husband dearest, the biggest critic of my life, and also you know, my biggest cheerleader, but my biggest critic. And I wanted to take his opinion, and that was his opinion. But then when I look back, I realized, of course, if you think about his background, he's as traditional and conservative as it comes, and I'm actually not. So I probably should have just stayed true to my liberal self.
Next book.
Next book.
That's it. You do what you want.
Yeah.
I appreciate the narrator's observation of toxic behaviors. That was there was a lot of thought, it seemed, that went into understanding intergenerational trauma and, you know, the parents and Jazz. It was really brutal how the parents behaved at times. I kept saying to myself, that's really abusive, you know, the way they spoke to the children, the way they spoke to each other. That stood out for me. Was this always supposed to be about intergenerational traumas?
No, I had started writing this book as sort of as a healing thing for myself, and it wasn't supposed to be about a lot of these issues. But as I wrote on, I realized, you know, this is a great platform to bring in other issues that do need representing in our culture, in our community, such as intergenerational trauma, which is not often discussed. And the reason why I left it that way was because it's such the way you would see it, having grown up in the West, you would see it as abuse. But in Eastern culture, that's parents. You know, that's how those were their expectations, and that's how they did speak. And you, as a child growing up in that world, that was normal. It was not abusive. But at the end, after Mira goes through her transformation, you know, she calls her parents out on it.
She does.
And they're not happy about it because they feel that she doesn't have the right to do that, and it's disrespectful, but she does call them out on it. And they then begin to see their own mistakes because they have the old world mentality, which is your parents are always right and the children need to listen. And she says, no, you are wrong. And these are the mistakes you have made. And we as a whole family are now suffering the consequences for it. So.
Right, yeah, I thought that was a very pivotal moment. And also just, you know, with Jeet's death,
Yeah.
how he seems to be, like, symbolize that,
Yes.
you know, with his sexuality and how he was just mortified and, yeah.
Because he internalized the old culture and the old views. And that's why he couldn't escape it. Although his sister Mira tries to say, don't worry about it, you're an American, it's accepted here and you'll be fine, but he can't handle it because he needs his parents' approval. And it's because of that that he can't handle the fact that now that they know, they've seen him vulnerable. And this is his only escape.
Yeah, very painful.
Yeah.
So even though you originally had different perspectives, there still were different storylines that were coming together.
Yes.
So while the narrator, you know, may have been, you know, primarily Mira, you never lose control of all the romance and the family and Mira's personal growth and, Jazz and her sister, that whole storyline, and how did you, for being somebody not organized, how did you make that come together in such a cohesive way?
A lot of editing. I basically, I had each person's story and each person's character in my head. And then in terms of how are they going to cross paths, that was something I sort of made up as I went along. And then the only time I actually made a chart was because if you've read the book, then you know that every chapter is often in a different year and it's like a different timeline. So I had to one day, literally, I found my daughter's construction paper because that's how organized I am. I don't even have a piece of paper. I had a green piece of construction paper and a marker, right? And I start writing down, I start jotting down the years and the ages of the kids because I'm like, wait a minute. All these kids, by the time it's like 1998, how old are they going to be? And then it has to match out, Stories need to interweave and then knots need to be tied at the end. And I didn't want to leave things hanging because as a reader, I hate that. I hate reading a book and you get to the end and you're like, what? So what? So what happened and why and what does this mean? And that's it? They're never going to be together and then she never is going to tell us. I can't deal with that. So I had to make my story tied up in every possible loose end I had to get them.
And you did, you got them. I felt a lot, I felt a sense of okay, this story, it's done.
It's done.
Yeah. And that leads to my next question. The romance, for Mira's romance storyline, it was really refreshing that she didn't need to be with the man that she was passionate about in a traditionally lustful way, that she instead found an everlasting and quiet love with a good man and a good father, and that was nice because it was also realistic. But did you always plan for that to happen?
No. So literally for the first 10 years, I didn't have an ending as I was writing this book because you have to understand, I started writing this book as a 25-year-old girl. Okay? And then I put it down for years because I had kids. And then I went back to it. And then I went to study and start working full-time. So I put it down for a few more years. Then I picked it up as a 32-year-old woman and then started writing and writing. And then I thought to myself, wow, I was such an amateur back then. And so then, you see that and then it wasn't till I was literally 40 till I said, now I know my ending. Because the 25-year-old me and the 30, 35, 38-year-old me couldn't figure out how to end this story. What's the right way? But the 40-year-old woman who had grown into an actual woman, I said, absolutely. She is the main character of this story. And there's no man that can define her. Her existence, her happiness, her love. Her love is to herself. And that's why she picked her husband at the end, because she realized that Dave was an illusion that she was sort of hanging on to. And even though he was still hanging on to her, and what was real was what she had created out of her heartbreak. And I wanted to bring that message to a lot of young girls these days, because I find that a lot of young girls, after breakups and heartaches, they're sort of left empty, like empty vessels. So by the time they've had a few relationships, they become emotionally unavailable. Why? The love is within from yourself. It's not from the man that who's giving you love. He's loving you because you are love yourself. And I wanted Mira to be the embodiment of that. The real female, strong character.
Yeah, and she had a very strong sense of self-love even from the beginning when she was taken by him.
Yes.
She wasn't losing her head over him,
Yeah, she still kept her boundaries.
She still kept her boundaries, which was really admirable. I wish I was like that. Were there other versions of the ending?
I thought about letting her have Dave, because I'm also this hopeless romantic, and I cry, as my kids will attest to. I cry every romantic movie. And I was like, oh my God, but they were in love, and then you just, and there were a couple of my friends who, their reaction was like, but like, wait, but why did she end up with, her romantic love? And I said, because when you grow up, you realize that's not real love. And I mean, it's only a part of love, it's an aspect. And so she, had become a real woman, and that was a part of her life. It was her daughter, it was her husband, the life that she created for herself, and she wasn't going to go recklessly abandon it for another man, so who she had not spent 20 years with. So yeah.
I know, part of me too, I was like, oh.
I know.
I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So what I did for
She
my...
did kiss him though.
Yes. So that's what I did. I'm about to say that. So what I did for my romantics was I gave you a little passion right at the end, like, oh yes, they're almost there, and then I'm like, no way. I take it away after that. So.
Well, I'd like to open up any questions that anyone here may have.
Very good discussion. I wanted to ask you, you are a visual person. When you read, you see the scene, how it happens.
Yes.
How do you see the emotions?
How do you see
of the story?
So I see it, the way I brought my emotions into this book, into the characters, was I sort of looked back on how I was feeling when I had experienced loss. And so I had to see myself before I could see the characters. And so I took my own visual, I guess, image of how I felt, and I tried to then put it into the characters. And so to see, if you're reading the book, can you see their pain? Can you see their suffering? Can you see yourself in the characters' suffering, in the characters' transformation? I wanted you, the reader, to be able to do that, Thank you.
I think it's a very courageous thing to write, because you are exposing yourself. You're opening up, and that's a scary thing to do. And you're now in judgment of other people who are doing, and I really applaud your courage, and excellent, and this has been fabulous.
Thank you. I want to say something about that. When I was writing the book, there were times where I hesitated. I was like, can I say this? Like, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? And I'm not a black sheep. I haven't been my whole life. I've been, I asked my parents, they're here. I've been the good girl. I've always done what I was supposed to do, what was expected of me. And I'm not that bold and courageous. I act like it, I know. But if you see me on the dance floor, wow, she's got a lot of courage. No, but generally, I'm a big scaredy cat. I am a very big scaredy cat. And for me to make myself vulnerable to the world and open myself to criticism was a huge thing. I can't tell you how many times I went back and forth and said, should I bring this topic up? Should I not? Like, people might hate me for it. But then I thought, no, I'm a writer, and I cannot lie to my creative self. I have to be true to myself as a writer. I have to be bold. If I'm ever gonna use my courage ever in my life, then this would be the time.
So I really applaud that courage.
Thank you for noticing it.
Oh, yes.
It's hard to put your vulnerable self out there. It really is.
Another question arising from this, did you experience any direct criticism for any of the topics that you brought up?
I did. From some of the reviewers, it was something about that had to do with the language that I had used about homosexuality, and honestly, it was my mistake. It was only because I was ignorant. I had to probably do more research. And then I went back and I said, look, this is still the development stages. I can go back and change this and make it right. Because oftentimes what's politically correct keeps changing. And sometimes, I'm not on board with everything that's changing. So I was happy to make that change to their satisfaction. And then they continued reviewing the book. That was one criticism. Another criticism that I received was the fact that that they felt that the ending wasn't enough. That you said that you felt like I had tied up all the loose ends, but some people criticized that, in fact, at the end of the story, they should have heard more about the siblings. I mean, I do say sort of, you hear in the background what's sort of going on in their lives, but they wanted more. They felt like their stories should have been explored even more at the end. But then yet other people said no, because they weren't the main character. So what I had to learn from hearing criticism was that at the end of the day, it's a matter of opinion, and not everyone's
Your
going to
opinion.
agree.
Yeah, I would disagree with them.
Yeah.
I think that there were nice layers of stories that you could learn about. You learn a lot about Jazz, even though
Right.
you know, Jazz is largely absent from the household because he's running off doing his shenanigans.
Yeah.
But you learn a lot about him as a character, and in fact, I thought it was very insightful that you know, perhaps Jazz is the way he is because of his, you know, the toxicity in his family.
Yes. Yes.
So that, you know, a lot of people, you know, that was very thoughtful.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to bring, I believe that it's wrong to say that every character is going to live a perfect life. I needed to say that, you know, there are people who never get out of grief, who experience something as traumatic as Jazz did, and guess what? They can't fix their lives. Their lives become failures. They are failures, and their lives are devastated as a result. And guess what? That is the sad and unfortunate tragedy of people's lives. Not everybody makes it through like Mira, unscathed. You know, not everybody is able to get to that point. So I wanted to bring, there's different people, and people experience loss and trauma and intergenerational trauma in different ways. We're not all winners. Many of us are losers.
And the thing I really appreciated in the book is I feel like, how does she know my story? I mean, she's talking about my brother. She's talking, you know, no matter where you're from and what your background is, we're all people. We all have the same issues. And that really touched me.
Right. Yeah, the humanness of it all, right? Like everybody in the family, every family has its, you know, it's a perfect review quote, complex depiction of a family turmoil.
Right.
What family doesn't have these characters or these troubles?
Yes, exactly. So I wanted it to be a universal message. It wasn't just about this Indian family. It's about any family. It's not just about this sick girl in the city. It's about any young girl growing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was, it really is a wonderful book.
Thank
I'm
you.
so glad that you brought this to my life.
Thank you.
This
Thank
was
you
really
so
exciting.
much.
Does
Thank
anybody
you.
else have any other questions?
So I just overall had one quick question. So it's really interesting to me that you know, when it came to like Mira's sister and her at the end of her marriage and her having an affair and all of that, and yet like when Mira is in that same she lets her you know, I guess her self, I don't know the term, but basically like her sense of like moral high ground tends to slip a little bit at the end with Dave. Like, so just, I thought that was interesting, but she pulls herself back.
yeah, she, you know, I wanted to show how it was in her character to always do the right thing. But at the end of it, you know, she was human, and, you know, she sort of almost was swept away with his charm because she was in love with him at one point. But then she reflected on that experience and said, wait a minute, I'm not that same girl anymore. I've evolved from this. And then she sort of put herself back together. And I think it was important when you said, why did you end the book this way? She had to end up with her husband because that would be in alignment with her character. I think it would have been out of character for her to have abandoned her life and gone away with Dave. Because she was so, her faith in God, her values, you know, in her religion was such a grounding and important part of her life. So I don't think she could have just immediately abandoned all that about her and then left him. And
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
so,
I felt terrible what her sister went through.
yes,
It was really awful.
yes,
Her
it was.
abuse and how her youth and young womanhood was taken from her.
Yeah, and it was, I wanted to show, not every girl is as lucky as Mira to find the right guy. There's a lot of girls who have bad marriages and then looking for love, then have bad relationships with men who take advantage of them. And then at the end, they sort of settle in a life, but, they haven't found the love of their life. And that's the story of many women, but that doesn't mean she doesn't keep going, we have to, so.
Yes. Any last questions or comments?
It was just a very relatable book. I felt it was very multifaceted. It covered a traditional Indian family that just immigrated, and as you said, pretty much all families. And even growing up, I always wondered how children from the same household can be so different. They're being raised by the same parents, yet they're so different because I guess individual experiences perhaps outside of the household shaped each one individually, like Jazz, his occurrences at his school since he was a young child. Then you have the journey into loss, how everyone grieved in their own way. As someone who experienced loss at a relatively young age, that the material you read at the opening of this session was actually the one that stood out to me most. I cried when I read that. And just hearing you say it, it choked me up because you hit the nail on the head with loss. I mean, that's just something you can never turn back the hands of time. How do you? The only thing you have left is something tangible. And the way you articulated that so nicely, the sense, and it just brings you to that point where you think to yourself, like, you've lost this person, but these are the things that you have. And I know you touched on it in another way with what's important in life is our experiences as opposed to material possessions.
Yes.
Then I looked at it from another viewpoint, that that's all we have left of the person we've lost. So when my father passed away, my mother and I had such a hard time with his closet. She refused. She's like, no, but that was his favorite jacket. So touching on that was, it was heart-wrenching. So you talk about loss, you talk about love. It was a tale of unrequited love between Mira and Dave. At the end, I was, I was almost rooting for them, and I'm like, wait, but she's got this whole family, and then you realize, like, it was almost like a tale of something that was beyond their control when the mother intervened, and you feel like life was unfair to them.
Right.
So you go through this whole journey of emotions where you're like, well, yes, she did find love with Inder, and she has this beautiful child, Zenith, and they're a cute family, and the way it ends with, they're all on the couch, but then you think of Dave's standpoint, and you're like, wait, he held on to this because he had no idea what happened.
Right.
And you feel sorry for them.
Yes.
Like, oh, had this been another time and place, what would have that timeline been? Then Jazz's whole journey, totally relatable.
Yes. And also heart-wrenching.
Also another gut-wrenching thing because, as first-generation students here, we all went through some element of bullying. My brother and I did.
Yes.
We were born and raised in Queens. We didn't quite fit in. And just seeing what he went through, I'm sure there are many children who go through that level of bullying and what effect it took on him. And like you said, not everyone thrives through such experiences.
Yes.
It can set people back for life. And it almost was like his life path was almost set for so many years in such a doomed way that toward the end, when he did get that coincidental job, I don't know if it was coincidental, I didn't need to ask, with Bala Industries, does that change his life trajectory? Like, I wanted to ask, what happens a little bit to...
So it was actually not coincidental. So I brought in a little... Yes, she did. So I brought in that little Bollywood pizzazz. If you ever watch Bollywood drama, you will know that the evil, the woman, right, she's behind it, and she...
the brother?
Yes, well, the thing is, that's the other thing, because remember, she was a woman who had one son who was going to inherit their entire fortune. And there was no way she was going to let him marry some middle class, no name girl from America. Like that was not the plan. And so she had the power and the resources to turn things around. So yes, it was unjust what she did. But at the same time, I did that purposely. I did, because we wanted to like sort of, and do you remember the part where there's a letter? When she looks, she finds the pictures of Dave with the other woman, and she thinks he's cheated on her. There's a letter in there that says, I did it to warn you, you know. And she's in such a rage, but and in the back of her mind, subconsciously, she thinks the handwriting looks familiar. And then, but whose handwriting is it, right? It's actually Jazz's handwriting. And he is sort of taken, now remember, he's a good for nothing, he's not a high class student, why would he be hired? You know, and yeah, we'll give you some money, we'll give you a job, we'll give you a position, but you have some side jobs to do. So it was sort of to get the clock working, he was roped in, and so he got to know of what was happening with his sister, and obviously he was not going to say anything to anyone because he had already caused the mess with his brother, and he was very guilty for it. So he sort of was thinking that he was doing the right thing. He was doing the right thing. He was saving his sister, and he was benefiting from it because maybe now he could make his parents proud with his job and everything. So that's like how that kind of was in.
Poor guy.
Yeah, right. So
So
that was
traumatized.
yeah. So that
That's beautiful, lots of layers that you covered, loss, family, love,
Love in so many different
Growth.
ways and forms.
Yeah.
yes,
family love, parental love, child love,
Yes.
everything. And just transformations of characters, it's very well done, very eloquent and articulate. I really enjoyed reading it, and I felt it was truly relatable on many levels.
thank you.
So,
Thank you all for coming. I know it's a Saturday afternoon and you could be doing better things, but thanks for joining me.
You should be so proud of
Thank
her.
you.
And there are refreshments and snacks and some drinks and water, so please help yourself and